There's no denying that talking about race can often become heated, divisive, and downright uncomfortable. The Living Undivided show, hosted by Chuck Mingo, exists to be a place where conversations on race are approached with grace and empathy. Chuck is the founder and CEO of Courageous Love, a racial healing, solidarity, and justice movement launched in 2015. Through the movement, thousands of participants have been catalyzed into action. Each week on the show, Chuck introduces the audience to a guest who is a change agent, reaching across racial lines and working toward racial healing. These stories are examples of the grace, boldness, and courageous love necessary to bridge the divide in our country. This is Living Undivided.
Welcome to this episode of Living Undivided. And if you've been paying attention to the things that we air, the ways that we post, I hope what you're hearing is that we are optimists around here. And actually not just optimists, we have hope, which is actually even better. And today you're going to hear a story that makes me hopeful when it comes to race relations in our country. I'm excited to be here with two friends, and I would call them both friends, who had a very, very unique connection that started a journey. And you're going to hear all about that today. So I am here immediately to my left is Chief Mike Mills, who's the chief of the Miami Township Police Department here east of Cincinnati, and Achmed Bagel, who is a friend and also a citizen of Miami Township. And the two of you had a powerful email that has led to some really amazing things happening in the community. So we're going to unpack all of that. But it is true, this relationship started with an email. So maybe Achmed, you sent the email, but Chief Mills, I'd love for you to talk about what you felt when in, what was it, the fall of 2020, and everyone obviously knows what 2020 was, specifically as it related to the George Floyd incident, Breonna Taylor. So you get an email from a Black citizen in Miami Township. Talk about that.
Well, first, thanks for having me, and thanks for inviting us to Undivided. But go back to the email, I believe it was May of 2020, I got a random email from someone I did not know, Achmed Bagel, who described himself as a Black man living in Miami Township. Very lengthy email, wondering how Miami Township was prepared to protect him and his family as a Black man living in white suburbia. From there, we struck up an email conversation in which we set up a lunch date. He also had emailed our neighboring city police chief, Jamie Mills, and so we set up the lunch date with all three of us. We had a great conversation. I told him what we were doing to not be like some of these national scenes. That we were an accredited police agency, and all the things we were doing and things we were going to do. Achmed, on the other hand, told me about Undivided and what you guys were doing at Crossroads, and at that moment it kind of clicked to me, and I told Achmed, I said, I might be interested in that because that might be the one thing we're not doing. Getting in and listening to some of our Black and brown residents directly, hearing stories. And the way he described it to me made me want to do it even more. So after we finished our lunch that day, I followed it up with an email of all the things we were doing, just kind of remind him, such as body-worn cameras, police accountability, individual officer tracking, accountability standards, various trainings that we have all of the officers go through. And at the conclusion of that email, I told him, don't forget about Undivided, I'm still interested. So that's how it got started.
I love that. So Achmed, as you think about that email, talk about where did it come from and what did you hope? What if you had a hope in sending it, what was your hope?
Yeah, so like you mentioned earlier, Chuck, 2020 was just a frustrating year for lots of folks, COVID, and for the Black and brown community, with seeing nationalized or televised, I would say, killings of two men that just broke the straw for me. Right? These things were in the public and were on television quite a bit, but George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, for me specifically, were it. I was really heartbroken and sad when I saw a young man in this neighborhood jogging, getting shot and killed. And I also saw the police brutality happening to George for, now we know, 9 minutes, even longer, right, than we initially thought. And I was like, we have to get to a point where I can be seen as a human and not as necessarily a threat to anybody, right? Or less than anybody, that is. It'd be police and or just neighbors that may think, because of the color of my skin, I am not a human. So that was playing in my mind, and thankfully my wife said, it's on your mind, it's on your heart, send the email. And like Chief Mills mentioned, I sent it first to Jamie Mills, and she said, you need to send it to the other one too. So
because they're kind of neighboring cities.
yes, Milford.
Right?
So we consider ourselves living in
Communities,
Milford, but you know, it's the Miami Township. And so I sent it to him as well, and I was really surprised to get a response that they were willing to. I didn't know police chiefs were open to talking to citizens, or there may be complaints, kind of thing. So I was surprised to hear an invite, a yes to my lunch meeting. So a couple of days or a week so later, we met and we talked. We just had a candid conversation. A little nervousness initially, but you know, it was good. It was a good conversation that both Chief Mills had with me.
Yeah. And you had experience with Undivided, you know, attending Crossroads Church, where Undivided was founded, and you know, we're both attendees of Crossroads Church. And so, what was it about Undivided that you thought might be helpful in a conversation with police in 2020?
Yeah, no. So Undivided, I did this a couple of years back. Don't quote me on the year specifically, but we were invited by our friends Matt and Anita to join. We have 2 small children there as well, so the mix worked perfect. And in our group setting, it was myself and my wife. We are a biracial couple. Matt and Anita are Caucasian, and then we had our other friends that are a Black couple with Black children, and then we had a North Korean couple as well with children. And I thought, man, there's no time that this intentionally happens, right? I don't know of people that have that group of friends, unless they maybe went to college, kind of thing. So that was powerful for me in learning everybody's background and learning and just eye-opening, right? So going through that experience, and I thought, man, great. And those friends are still my friends to this day. It's like, Undivided, why not Undivided for the police department? Yeah. We can give an opportunity to see other, right, then, and know that behind the color of our skin, we're human. Yeah. And me knowing that this rift has always been between, or the mistrust, right, between the police and or Black and brown people of color. It's like, okay, let's do it. Stop complaining. Let's do something about it.
Right. So. And I mean, and just this idea that transformation can happen in shared relationships.
Absolutely.
So, you know, one of the things we also talk about in Undivided is empathy. And, you know, Chief Mills, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what it's been like to be a police officer walking through 2020, to be a police chief walking through 2020. Because in some ways, there's an impact that goes, it's not about what you have done, it's simply about the uniform you wear. It's how you show up. So talk about what that's been like for you.
It is. It's about the uniform. First, I'll start off by saying there's about 700,000 police officers in the United States. And if 70 of them make a horrible mistake, make a horrible decision, that's 0.0001 of police officers. But to a lot of people who see it on the news, that is police officers. So unfortunately, that depiction, people think, well, that's how all police officers are. It kind of hit home for me one day when I came home from work during the heat of the summer with the demonstrations and some of the rioting in some cities. And my daughter, who's 16, she comes in the house and she says, "How many black people have you killed?" And I was kind of taken back, and I said, "None, zero. I've never fired my gun in 28 years. Most police officers I know go through their whole career without ever firing their weapon or being involved in a death situation where someone dies in their custody." And I said, "Why would you ask that?" And she said, "Well, all these kids on Instagram are sending me a message that your dad's killing all the black people." Wow. So that kind of hit home to me of, if this is what they're saying to her, what are the other several 100 million people thinking?
Yeah.
But it's been difficult to be someone in uniform, and I've always taken a stance. I can only control me, but being the police chief, I can control me and the police department. And we have a very positive culture. We treat everybody like we would want to be treated. Just like Achmed sends me the email, and it doesn't matter to me if who the person is. If they have a concern such as he had, I'm willing to sit down and listen.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a difficult year. I would say not necessarily. It's more the education piece that people don't have. Number one, because it's not right there in front of them, and maybe they don't go looking for it. But to sum all that up, yeah, it's been a difficult year.
Yeah. And again, in the spirit of empathy, you also talked about a situation that helped you understand how, a person like me, a person like Achmed feels. You talked about a friend of yours who had a son that was going down south. Talk about that.
Yeah, a friend of mine, Jonathan, he met with me in my office one day, and he's a black man, and he said that his son was going to drive down to Mississippi. This is during the thick of COVID, when people were really not wanting to get on airplanes, to go pick up a dog in Mississippi from here in this area. And he told me, he said I had to have the talk with him, and I was like, what talk? And he's like, it's the talk. When you get pulled over, make sure that you have your driver's license and your registration above your visor, to make sure that you're not reaching for something, you're not trying to get in your glove box, that all you have to do is just reach right here and pull it out. And he explained it to me as the talk that black fathers have to give their sons. And that was another turning point for me, as far as hitting home, that, wow, I have two drivers, they're both daughters, but I've never had to have that conversation with them to make sure that you don't open your glove box or make sure this or that. But yeah, that was a like a turning point. And as a side note, this is a black father talking to his black adult son who plays in the NBA. So it's it's even more startling.
Yeah.
So.
I just thought that was a poignant story, and when you shared it with me, even as we were kind of getting to know each other, I just thought it was a poignant moment of perspective, right? Getting a different perspective. And I had the privilege, and it was a privilege, of facilitating the Working Undivided group that happened at Miami Township. And it was just an incredible experience. And so let's just get into that. I mean, now that we're, a week or so past it, think about where were you at on that first week, maybe that first, second week? What were you thinking of the experience as you first got into it? I mean, you brought together an incredible team of people. citizens, you had other civic leaders that were in there. I think probably 60 to 70% of the people who participated were officers, leaders in your police force. And so what were you sensing, both of you, maybe Achmed, we'll start with you. What were you sensing that first week or so as you started to step into this conversation?
Yeah, no, so it took me back to our first interaction at the diner, right? Meeting police officers. It's like, I'm in a room full of police officers. So I didn't know what to expect initially. And really, for me to going into Undivided, I wanted to be as authentic as possible, me personally, but I also wanted that authenticity shown to me, right, when I met with police officers. So I was fearful that that may not happen during Undivided at all. So first week, you lead, you and Troy lead, and it's pretty quiet on the. We did it virtually, so it was pretty quiet with participation. But the small group sessions, I tell you, powerful. I consider these guys my friends. Yeah. In making connections in that sense, and then obviously also after group setting meetings. So no, they opened up, which was my fear of not happening, and it was great. Because one thing it showed me is that we are human.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our profession is one thing, but we go back home to our families and children. We go back and see our parents and grandparents. We all have that humanity that we all share. So, no, it was awesome, I will say.
Yeah. Mike, what were you thinking first week, second week after jumping into this?
Well, I had thought about it for several months, putting it together, and I wasn't worried at all about it until about 10 minutes before it started. And I was thinking, oh wow, because I was in the thick of putting together the cohort and inviting residents and getting our supervisors. All the participants were our supervisors, since culture is built from the top down. I wanted to get all of our supervisors in and our administrator, Mr. Wright. But yeah, it was like 5 or 10 minutes before I got really nervous that, oh wow, I hope this goes okay.
If it makes you feel any better, I felt the same way about 5 to 10 minutes before it started.
It's all been a great plan and felt good for the last 4 or 5 months, however long we had worked on putting it together. But then the nerves came. But just like Achmed said, that first meeting was a little quiet. I tried to speak up and tried to lead from the front to show everybody there's nothing to fear here. Because a lot of the police officers, they see these things on TV where this police officer said this or that, now they've gotten fired. So I think a lot of them were maybe a little apprehensive. But as we worked our way through, obviously, you saw everybody open up and just like he said, friends. I think everybody's become kind of friends. We've been locked in a room for 12 hours over 6 weeks, and we've all come out better people. The police officers and our black and brown residents who had some revelations themselves.
Absolutely. And we're going to get to those. I'd love for both of you to talk about what was the most meaningful experience you had over the 6 weeks. Because there's a bunch of things. There's things that happen in kind of the whole group on Zoom, then there's the small group breakouts. But then there's also some things that happened outside of the sessions as you guys connected with each other. So talk about that, Achmed. What was your most meaningful experience in the 6 weeks?
Yeah, so for me, getting the perspective of police officers specifically, because in my immediate group of friends, I don't have police officers. I did not have police officers as friends, right? So having the conversation specifically around George Floyd was it's the one thing that came up. And, we saw a clip, a 2-minute clip or so, that blew up, right, initially. And I I don't know that is a training issue, or that is something that's been, discussed multiple times, the knee on the neck kind of thing, and being abolished in quite a few police departments, right? I don't know that. I thought that's standard.
Right.
So learning that some things that you see on TV is not just, like Chief Mills mentioned, it's the bad apple doing the bad thing, specifically. So learning that from the two guys I initially met with was really meaningful. And I'm happy to continue these conversations with them because I never had somebody to ask those questions to.
Yeah.
And that's also in reverse. Their group of friends that they shared don't have a person of color per se.
Right.
Right. So they were open enough to ask me questions about my opinion on things.
Yeah.
So that was absolutely powerful for me.
That's good. And just the perspective that comes from that is key. So, Chief Mills, I'd love for you to share the same thing. What was the most meaningful experience you had?
Well, I've been sitting here while I was listening to Achmed, trying to think of what's the most, because there's been so many. I think the most, and I think I've said this 4 or 5 times over the 6-week period, was just hearing from Tony, the guy that I know as the jokester, the guy that sings the national anthem before the volleyball and basketball games, the guy that's jabbing me, walking through crowds. To hear him talk about how he has been treated in society as a black man was pretty disturbing, and mainly because I didn't know about it, but he obviously suppresses that. But then going back to even when he was a child growing up in Wyoming, where he couldn't swim at the Wyoming pool. And they had to drive to Middletown to go swimming, and that's just the way it was. But yeah, after that week of hearing Tony talk about that was week 1. I think that made me lean in a little bit more, even though I was already invested in Undivided. It made me lean in a little bit more and think, wow, I haven't experienced these things, but Tony, a guy I've known for many years, he has, and he still probably is. So.
Yeah, you brought it home in a profound way. I'll share my most meaningful moment. And it really was the last week when we did the exercise around what are you going to start doing? What are you going to stop doing? What are you going to start doing based on the 6-week journey? And I mean, for me, the thing that was so meaningful was, and Chief, you referred to this earlier, this was not just an opportunity for police to get a different perspective. It was an opportunity for everyone to get a different perspective. And I heard, the Black and brown citizens on the call talk about the things that they are seeing differently and how they want to change. And it was just really powerful. And so now that you've experienced the 6 weeks, it's a motivated group, and you pulled together a group of leaders, a group of influencers to talk about what's next. What's next for Miami Township and Milford on the other side of this Undivided experience?
Same week, right, Chuck? We were given the opportunity in small group sessions, come up with a list of ideas that we want to see happen. And it's an extensive list, but a powerful list, I would say, because, and I will speak for myself and my opinions in our conversations, but I know there are Black and brown people out there that would like that opportunity of having a conversation with Chief Mills or one of his leaders on his in his police force. So some of those things are coming up. We haven't put dates together yet. I know we have talked about having our cohort actually meet here at one of our local beautiful parks that you and Troy are absolutely invited to.
Can't wait.
But yes, Chief Mills.
Yeah, we've got a lot of ideas. We've got I've talked to Jara and Tammy, a couple of our other Black residents who were in our cohort that have the the racial equality group, and I told them I wanted to be part of it. I wanted to be, I wanted to, and they were pretty excited that I wanted to be part of it. Before Undivided, I didn't know it had existed. We're going to Melinda, who was another one of our Black residents, who's also a junior high school principal.
Right.
She is committed to getting us into the schools, because they're starting some racial solidarity groups within the schools,
Right.
like a 50-50 group, maybe 20 kids, and a really good composition of Black, brown, Asian, white kids all together. And they want us, the Undivided participants from Miami Township, to come in and be part of it and talk to them about what we know and what we've learned, and just be a source there.
Yeah. I mean, all of those ideas. And again, the thing that I encouraged you all with, and why I wanted this story to be a story that we've featured on Living Undivided, is because, I think people need to see examples of hope here. People need to see places where the narrative is different, because then they can believe the narrative can be different where they live. And what I love is it started with an email, and it started with a lunch, and look at where we are now. And so kudos to the two of you for having the courage, honestly, Achmed, having the courage to respond to your wife's prompting and say, I will do that. And you, Chief Mills, having both the courage and the humility to receive that and say, hey, let's grab lunch and talk about it. I just think that is a powerful lesson for all of us, that in these times where you can easily be stuck and feel like there's nothing I can do, there are steps that you can take and do to live undivided. So final question, let me ask this of everyone who comes on Undivided, is just to finish that statement. Living undivided means. So Chief Mills, let's start with you. What does it mean to you to live undivided?
Living undivided to me means there's no difference between me and you. Yes, we are of different skin color, but I don't see you as that. We're all trying to make a positive impact on the world. The nice thing about, one of the additional nice things about Undivided is it gave me an opportunity to look through your eyes as a Black man and see what you see. Obviously, I can't see it firsthand, but I'm listening to the stories and I'm seeing and feeling the emotion. So living undivided means being one. It's not Black, brown, white. It's one.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. No, for me, living undivided really is humanity, right? We are human. And I mentioned it earlier, we have families that we go back to. Other than our career paths that we have taken, we are human. And I want that to happen in our neighborhood, or area that we live in, Miami Township, and hopefully, it happens elsewhere as well. That we can coexist and not look at the other as not human, kind of thing. So that's what it means to me.
I love it. And as you all live that out in Miami Township, I believe you're going to see that. And so thank you again for your leadership. Thanks for your vulnerability and being willing to go on this journey of living undivided, and for joining us today.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
This episode of Living Undivided is brought to you by Courageous Love, a movement on a mission to unite and ignite people toward racial justice. The show is produced in Cincinnati, Ohio. You can learn more about our host, Chuck Mingo, and the movement by visiting www.chuckmingo.com. That's all for this episode. Join us next time for another episode.